Come here, Willow. Hi, guys. This is going to be sorry, and it's called Beyond Mendel. And it's not that Mendel was wrong, most especially his first and second laws were right, but that it's more complicated than that because there are more than one, there's more than one gene that can contribute to a trait, and there's also environmental influences that he didn't really consider or know about. So it's complex. So anyway, that's where we pick up. Before we do that, Willow, stop. Sorry, my cat is being annoying. Come here. I'm gonna pause for a second here. Come here. All right, that's Willow. I don't know if you can see her. Here, Willow. And she's wanting to play, and I'm recording. So anyway, I'm trying to distract her. So anyway, before we get into the stuff that goes beyond Mendel, I want to just kind of recap the recessive and dominant type stuff and how they affect the disorders, because we're going to do a disorder study this chapter. So let's do that with the next slide here. With the genetic disorders, the recessive, remember, would be lowercase, lowercase. That can only happen if you have both recessive alleles, both your alleles are recessive. And if it is a minor disorder, it's not a problem, then I suppose you could have both parents be recessive or one parent recessive and one parent heterozygous. But for the most part, it shows up unexpectedly, I guess I should say, when both parents are heterozygous. So it's with the people getting their genome read, it's less of a surprise maybe for some, but usually it's a surprise because the parents did not distribute or exhibit the trait. And some examples of a recessive disorder are cystic fibrosis, respiratory. Hemophilia is excessive bleeding because the clotting factor is missing or not enough of it. And Dayton's muscular dystrophy, which, as implied, affects the muscles. So that's kind of a quick review of what happens with recessive and when they show up. The dominant, believe it or not, are actually more rare. And there's a couple reasons for this. One is that that the fetus dies before it's ever born, if it's an extreme dominant situation. The other is because the parents are going to show the trait if it's not, a lethal situation. Hi, Stevie Wonder. Come here and meet the people. This is Stevie. He has no eyes. He's got sonar. So when I clap, he comes. And he's very, very cuddly, but it's on his own terms. So I'm going to set him down and let him decide. So anyway, the parents would have they would know they have the trait, so they would be aware of passing it on and make that decision as an informed decision without having to have a genome done. So it's more less of a surprise, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. So anyway, you see there that there's 50% chance if only one parent has the trait, and a 75% chance if both do. And that's if they're heterozygous. If they're both dominant, then 100% chance. So anyway, that's a little bit about disorders. Now we'll go ahead and get into the chapter 5, but we will be working with some disorders a little bit later. Okay, well, we pick up with our discussion about complete complex inheritance. I was saying how Mendel gave us a really good foundation, something to really build on. The whole concept of dominant and recessive is in so much of the understanding of genetics, but it's not all there is. It's just the beginning. So Mendel basically built the foundation for us, but we have to take over and learn more and build the structure of knowledge for the genetics. For instance, when he was dealing with the pea plants, he was not concerned with whether the trait he was following was autosomal or a sex-linked trait, which he wouldn't be because he didn't even know about chromosomes then. So that is something that we learned afterwards. And I showed you in the last unit how to follow a pedigree and figure out whether it's an autosomal trait or a sex-linked trait. And that's all new information after Mendel. And we know this already. Genes that are on the same chromosome, in other words, they're on the X or they're on the Y, excuse me, are called sex-linked genes only because they are on the chromosome that also happens to code for gender. So that has nothing to do with sex itself. It's just what it is. I know that was funny. So anyway, it's just what chromosome it's on. So Mendel's traits were very distinct. For instance, the flowers were either purple or white. They weren't pink, they weren't lavender, they were either purple or they were white. The plants were either tall or they were short. There was nothing medium. So there were two very obvious forms, and he did that so that he could easily follow what was going on. But not very many things in life actually do that. Most of them are not as simplified as that. There are some, but not a lot. If you were to look at one of these complex inheritance situations, your genotype ratio would be the same. It's the phenotype, it's what we see that's going to vary the most. One of the reasons that it does vary is because we have chromosomes we haven't even considered yet. We actually have chromosomes that are not in the nucleus. They're in the mitochondria. There are genes there that can also change or code for certain things. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is
there's more than one gene on chromosomes that are within the nucleus. Another possibility is an environmental factor has caused a mutation somewhere. So there's a lot of different reasons why Mendel's phenotypic ratios don't jive. So you have to take a lot of things into consideration when you're looking at the genetics, and it gets very, very involved and complex. For example, lethal alleles. What are those? Well, they're what they sound like. They are alleles that, when found together, mean that that organism will not survive, or that gamete will not survive, one of the two. And depending on what lethal alleles you're talking about, sometimes they don't make it past being a gamete, sometimes they don't make it past being a fertilized egg, or there's a spontaneous abortion that takes place. Sometimes they're born, but they don't live long. I'll let you write here. So the significance to us then is in the ratio of the phenotype that we expect to see. For example, if you cross a heterozygote with a heterozygote, you would expect 3/4 of the possibilities, or 75% chance, that the dominant trait is going to show. 25% chance that it won't. But if, for example, let's see, both dominant alleles, whenever both dominant alleles are together, it's a lethal allele and that organism wouldn't survive, then we don't even put that into our ratio. So instead of 3/4 versus 1/4, now you have 2/3 versus 1/3, because you don't even consider the one that you know will not survive. So that's not the only possibility of dominant, homozygous dominant, but there are a couple diseases that I could use as an example, and that's why I mention it here. Again, I'll let you write, and then I'll explain. So this is the example of where you get like capital A, or capital, capital. And that's just one example of a situation, but there's a couple of real life, very dramatic situations with these alleles. One of them is a specialized kind of dwarfism. It's not all dwarfism, obviously, because if it were, then, well, I guess you'd see dwarfs or little people, but you wouldn't see the double double for sure, because that one would die soon. But I suppose heterogeneous you could see. But anyway, this is just the one specialized kind of dwarfism. And then the other example are the Mexican hairless dogs, where if they get a double double or a double dominant, they don't survive. Multiple alleles. Normally you think, okay, an individual carries two alleles. That's true. One from mom, one from dad. At least, obviously, the autosomal, because, well, I guess the sex link too, but also the autosomal specifically, I guess. Anyway, you got two alleles. But the allele you got from mom and the allele your siblings got from your mom may not look alike. Because life happens and there are mutations in between there. Actually, genes can have a lot of different alleles. Maybe they start and end with the same bases, but their code is slightly different. So even though two siblings have inherited the same, theoretically, same alleles, and they have a disorder or a disease, it may affect them differently. In other words, different symptoms may manifest. All these different alleles can combine in different ways, and you get the different phenotype or the different symptoms. So as you're writing here, what this is basically saying is there are different alleles with a little bit of differences in them, and that can affect the outlook or what you see on the outside or symptoms and that kind of thing. And then it gives you two examples. PKU, that's a genetic disorder where a certain amino acid builds up in the body, causing like seizures and mental disorders and that kind of thing. And the reason it's called PKU is because it's like phytokinuria or something like that. So it's just easier to call it PKU. And then the second example there is CF. That stands for cystic fibrosis. But this is basically telling you that those have hundreds, if not thousands, of different alleles. So every case is going to be slightly different. So that's what that's saying. So if we go back and look at Mendel then, and his experiment, what we were seeing there was what we call complete dominance. That's where, like I said before, the flower was either purple or it was white. The plant was either tall or it was short. There was no medium, nothing in between, no blending of traits. It was very specific. So since there's no blending of traits and one completely masks the other, that's what we call complete dominance. And that doesn't happen very often. There are traits in humans, in plants, in every organism that just have two forms, and that's it. But it doesn't happen as often as you would think based on Mendel's experiment. Anyway, it's called complete dominance. And remember, dominance is when one trait is masking the other. And even that has variations because you have one that, one type of masking where both traits are there, but you can't see the recessive because of the dominant. And then you have ones where the recessive allele is what we call turned off. It's inactive. It's not actively doing anything, and just the dominant allele is producing proteins, etc. So there's all sorts of ways of even being completely dominant and still having it vary. So anyway, that's complete dominance, and I'm going to go ahead and stop for today. And I want you to spend a good amount of time on your reading guide, and then we'll give you, the second half of the period, we'll give you some time on your project. Your project is due on Friday. Don't forget. So if your project is done and you don't have that to work on, that doesn't mean you can't work on something else. Go back to your reading guide, or read a book, or work on other homework. So you should be able to use constructively the time that's given to you today. Thank you.